Hey everyone, I'm Tom from Blender Tutor, and today we're going to be going over how to set up and light your scene in Blender using an HDRI, along with some tips on how to improve your renders. So using HDRIs in 3D lighting is extremely useful because, for one, it can basically serve as a starting point for you when you're lighting a scene. It automatically adds reflections to any type of reflective surface you have in your scene. So this spinning video right here is all lit just using HDRI. I also created this looping image of just the same model with a bunch of different materials and HDRIs to show how different a scene can look with the same environment but a different HDRI. So I have a little sample scene here that I put together just using some assets from Sketchfab. And if we go to rendered mode, I'm currently in cycles. You could see this is just the default gray lighting that you get when you first start a scene in Blender. And it is very bland and boring. So if we want to add an HDRI, you'll just go to the World Properties tab over here. Under this color right here, you could click this yellow button and add an environment texture. And this actually looks kind of cool with the pink, but what we'll do is hit open right here and just navigate to your folder with your HDRIs in it. All of these, or the vast majority of these, I downloaded for free from hdrihaven.com, which is a great resource for free HDRIs. So I'm gonna grab, I believe this is the one I was testing with. And instantly it just works, but if we want a little more power in customizing the direction of the light, we can go over to the shading tab over here. And I think by default, this is in object mode. So let's switch this to world, which will show our world environment texture. And if you have the Node Wrangler add-on installed, which you absolutely should, it comes with Blender. You can just click on this and hit Control-T. But if you don't have it installed, you'll just need to add a texture coordinate node and a mapping node. And now we can rotate on the Z of our HDRI. So if we go into the EV preview render, you can kind of just see it in real time as we move this. And I found that 125 degrees gave it a cool look. So now we could go back into cycles. It's going to be a little noisy, but once the denoising turns on, it looks pretty nice instantly. And then I just added a little area light in there to light the foreground a little bit more. And you basically have instant lighting, no work. It is amazing and super easy. By the way, if you'd like, you could download this finished scene on my Patreon at the $5 a month tier. That tier includes all of the finished project files from my tutorials, as well as material packs and other perks. Link is in the description. But let's say you want the lighting from the HDRI, but you don't want to see the HDRI in the background. That is super simple. We just go back up here to the Render Properties tab, go down to the Film dropdown and click Transparent, and that will turn off the background basically. You'll still keep the lighting, but it'll just turn off the background. So now I can export this image. So if I go over here to my Output Properties tab, I can export this as long as I have RGBA, which is the alpha channel. As long as I have that enabled, I'll be able to export this with transparency, and I'll be able to add in a background in post. But let's say I want the lighting from this HDRI. So let's turn off transparent. So let's say I want to keep this lighting, but I just want like a solid background color or even a different HDRI. That is simple. We can take our background node right here and duplicate that. And you can barely see it, but there's actually a color box. It just happens to be the same color as the node itself. So let's say I just want I really liked that pink background, but I don't want the pink color to be affecting my scene. I can just add in a mix shader and we'll plug both of these in. And then the last node we'll bring in is an input. It'll be the light path node. And we're gonna select the is camera ray. And what that does, we're gonna plug that into the fact value. All right, and there we go. So basically what this is camera array does is it will, if the camera is seeing the image, in this case it's the HDRI background image, it will basically mask that out, and then we could input a different image or color into our mix shader, and that will allow that to show through. So we're still getting the lighting from the HDRI, but we're getting a different background, and that is super useful. So what you could do now is also, we could just duplicate these nodes, but now I can select a different HDRI. So let's say I like this sky better, but I like the lighting from this other one. So I could plug that in right there. And now I can rotate this around. Let's go back into the preview mode just to load a little faster. And you can see it still works over here. So I'm gonna get these like cool clouds in the background. And there we go. Simple as that. And the last thing I want to show you is, what if you just are in your scene in the 3D viewport and you don't want to have to deal with going to the shading tab just to rotate your HDRI? What we can do is we can bring in a mesh. It could be any mesh. I'm going to use an empty. So let's just bring in an empty, and I'll call it HDRI controller. So now let's go to the shading tab one more time. For this second image, what we'll do is, instead of generated, let's do object. And we can select from our drop down, we can just select HDRI controller. Now we can go back out to our main scene, and with our empty selected, I can just rotate that in the 3D viewport, and I don't have to go anywhere else now. It's just a lot easier to control. And you can do that with your main HDRI as well. So you could have two different empties that control the two different HDRIs you're using. One could be used to control the lighting, the other one for the background. All right, and there's one other trick I wanted to show you real quick. And that is, what if you want to use the HDRI in a render and you actually want the floor of the HDRI to be touching your object and to receiving shadow? By default, let's turn this off. By default, the HDRI you turn on is just kind of an infinitely large sphere around your entire scene. So it'll be casting light from all different directions, but it won't be able to interact with your scene. But what you can do is project the HDRI onto a piece of geometry basically, and it will be able to receive shadow from your object, and it'll feel a little more integrated into your scene. That is how I created that rotating animation at the beginning of this. Sorry, there's a garbage truck outside. So yeah, that animation I showed at the beginning of this video was created using that technique, where basically I projected the HDRI onto a sphere, and I will show you how to do that really quick. So I'll just turn this one off and create a new one. So I have an HDRI in my scene right now. And what I will do is just bring in a new, we're gonna do, we're gonna do a UV sphere. And before these settings go away down here, let's just turn these up. So for segments, let's just do 64 and 64. Basically, the higher resolution, the smoother everything will look. You won't notice any like blocky geometry. And then we're gonna just have to scale that up quite a bit. It'll have to be scaled up at least big enough that your camera is inside of it. And then we could go into the front facing view, go into edit mode. Before we do that, let's add the HDRI. So add a new material, go to shading, and if you press with a node selected, if you hit Shift S, it'll let you select a different node and it'll just replace it. So we're just gonna do diffuse because we don't need it to have like specularity or anything. And then we'll hit Control T to add the image. And we're just gonna select the HDRI that we're using for the background. In this case, that is this red wall one. And let's go take a look now. It's looking correct. The one thing we want to do is, make sure the mapping is basically in line. So I can see the red wall is over here with the red vines, and that matches. For some reason, the first time I did this, the entire HDRI was backwards. So just make sure everything's lined up with your actual background lighting. And now we can go into edit mode, select the bottom half, and we're gonna wanna scale based on the 3D cursor, which should be in the center of your scene. And then just hit SZ0. And now if we go into camera view, we'd also hit smooth shading on that. Now we could go check out render view. So in preview mode, okay, we can see in preview mode in cycles, it's gonna be black, and that's because the light from the HDRI isn't able to get through the sphere we just created. So what we will do is, with that new sphere selected, let's go to the Object Properties tab, go to Visibility, and I believe we'll turn off Shadow. Cool, so we'll turn off Shadow, and that will allow the light to pass through the object. We could also turn off a lot of these other things. We don't need volume scatter, we don't need transmission, glossy. And then we could also scale down our sphere to whatever size you want it to be, while still being inside of with the camera inside of it. Now, this particular HDRI doesn't work perfectly because you can see some of these stuff is kind of bent in the background. It's not a perfectly flat floor, but that's fine. Some will work better than others, but you could also rotate this now and find a view that doesn't look incorrect. And then also you can turn on like depth of field and stuff so you can't quite see the background. So what I did in my animation was I used some depth of field, and I used a mist pass to kind of just focus on the foreground more than the background. This particular animation isn't necessarily something you'd be doing anyway. This is just kind of to show off the lighting of the HDRI. So what I did was I animated the rotation of the HDRI, and then I matched the rotation with the sphere that I used for the ground. And yeah, that is about it. If there are other questions you have of using HDRIs in Blender, just comment below and let me know. I'd be happy to create another video going over more tips if you guys are interested. So yeah, thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye.